This is Joe Delio from the live community bringing you a recorded webinar, Securing Remote Workloads from On-Prem to the Cloud, presented by David Cumbow, Derek Bergman, Darren Rogers, and Gabe Schuyler.
All right, good morning, and thank you everybody for joining and taking time out of your busy days to learn a little bit about what we're doing around securing remote workloads, both on-prem and in the cloud. My name is David Cumbow. I'm going to be your host for today. I'm joined by Derek, Darren, and Gabe. All four of us are going to walk you through some of the new challenges that we're definitely facing with all our new remote workloads and kind of the way that I think work is going to be from this point forward for the foreseeable future. We're going to do a quick kind of run through of certain challenges and use cases, and then we'll dive into some of the solutions that we have. So really to kick it off, right, one of the things I wanted to talk about is just where have we been and where are we going? I definitely, talking to many of my customers and the CTOs that run their companies, today's workforce is going to be different. There's no question about it. Talking to state agencies that originally leadership was very much against a remote workforce, now realizing that, remote work is very much plausible and works quite well for many of the types of workloads that are out there. Of course, you're going to have the need to have customer interaction and certain people be on premise, but many of the back office workers can probably do their job remotely. When you start looking at education institutions, the number of remote learning remote learning courses that are being done by higher ed institutions or even K through 12s is now going to definitely skyrocket. K through 12 is near and dear to my heart, and I've talked to many of the directors and CTOs of the neighboring districts here in Southern California and where I'm based out of, and they're definitely talking about at very least a hybrid work or a hybrid school schedule where you might spend 1 or 2 days or even 3 days out of the week at school, going between smaller class sizes, and then the rest of the days will definitely be remote, right? So there's definitely a need now for more distance learning, and as part of that distance learning or remote workforces, what we're also seeing as well is how do we digitize some of these assets that may not have been digitized before, stuff that may have been done on paper. How do we get that put into a process that you don't actually have to physically touch things and pass them around? So some of those digitized assets are going to be able to be handled on premise within your own data center or your own private cloud. Some of those assets are going to move up to a more public cloud or even cloud native workloads, and that's kind of where when we start talking about where our workloads are going to reside, there's always going to be I feel there's well, not always, there's definitely a chance that you're going to have a need for a physical data center. You might have legacy systems. I know especially in state, local, and education, there's definitely legacy systems that cannot be moved to the cloud. Or maybe you just rather have that initial CapEx expense, and you'd rather have the data local versus up in the cloud. It's really interesting to see a lot of compliance standards like CGIS or NERC-CIP or FedRAMP starting to accept the cloud handling of some workloads as well. Not full migrations to the cloud, but definitely a hybrid layout there. And when you start looking at a hybrid layout, you move from the physical data center up to either a private or public/government cloud like Azure or AWS or GCP. Some of those workloads may fully reside in that cloud, and it might just be a lift and shift of that physical data center workload up to the cloud. Or some of them, even better, might be a move to a cloud native technology. So things like serverless or containers, where the resources spin up as you need them, and then as they as they're not utilized anymore, they spin down, and you save that operational expense behind those specific resources. One example we're seeing right now is some higher education institutions are taking their ERP program during registration, putting that into a container and spinning it up in Azure or GCP or AWS. And then when the load of registration resides, resides, the resources spin down and are no longer needed, right? And it's just a kind of temporary, hey, I need a lot of resources, spin it up, it's there, everything's good, containerized, so spins up, spins down super quick. Once that's done, everything shuts down, you don't have that cost anymore. So what are we going to be focusing on today is, as we look at these workloads, right, whether it be physical on-premise, whether it be workloads that are natively or even forklifted into the cloud, or whether you're just looking at how do I better secure my remote workforces, right? Maybe my workloads aren't changing, but my my area of where my folks are actually accessing this data from is definitely spread out beyond the building that I own or the network that I own. How can we help secure your workloads across all of these? So to start it out, we're going to go ahead and hand it over to Derek Bergman. He's a systems engineer with Palo Alto Networks here in Southern California. And he's going to be addressing some of the challenges with the next generation, addressing some of these challenges utilizing the next generation firewall and GlobalProtect. Derek, it is all yours, sir.
Thank you, David. All right, let me make sure I can change the slide on here. Okay. All right, so some of the conversations I've been a part of lately have been around, client-less VPN and, securing access for, say unmanaged devices. So I thought I'd touch on it a bit here and point out some of the benefits with regards to those remote workloads. The main benefit of being in line with traffic, whether it's the, GlobalProtect client-less VPN or with an agent, is that you gain security functionality and the traffic is, always analyzed. So traditionally you'd have the, GlobalProtect agent, they would be deployed to a user's endpoint, and then that would establish that, an IPsec tunnel for VPN traffic, thus securing that traffic. But this is not ideal for every situation, because if you're, say you're using your own device in, say, a BYOD scenario, or you have a partner or contractor where you may not have administrative rights to, install applications on their device, it becomes difficult to deploy the GlobalProtect agent, in a timely manner. So back in PanOS 8.0, we introduced the clientless VPN portal, which allows you to benefit from, next generation firewall protection by means of a portal. The clientless VPN, essentially rewrites URLs and then presents a rewritten page to those remote users or clientless users in such a way that when they access any of those URLs, the requests go through that GlobalProtect portal. So you're not limited to only applications that are hosted, in your data center, but you think of applications hosted in the cloud or SaaS applications such as, Office 365, where you may have, maybe a conditional or restricted access by IPs to only allow access from your environment. In this case, you can, ensure that those clientless users have that security enforcement, granular access, and then you just maintain that visibility as they access those cloud or SaaS applications. And then also keep in mind that you will need the GlobalProtect subscription to take advantage of those clientless VPN features. This is a quick look at the supported technologies with regards to GlobalProtect clientless VPN. So as you can see, all major operating systems and browsers are supported here. And the last column is, specifying the web application technology supported. So really think of any HTML5 based application as being capable of utilizing clientless VPN for access on that GlobalProtect clientless portal. Let's take a look at an example scenario and configuration for GlobalProtect with a clientless VPN. So say you have a contractor that has he's been tasked with upgrading or implementing or even configuring a new HVAC system. That's common for large organizations. They have a team that routinely monitors energy consumption, temperatures, what have it, and to save on costs, particularly at night, and maybe to alert managers if temperatures fluctuate outside those normal ranges. So here in the screenshot, I'm creating a new clientless VPN portal, and this is similar to what you would do to configure a GlobalProtect portal using an agent, except with a couple modifications. Notice in the client authentication section, I selected browser as the operating system. So this means only users who authenticate using a browser can access, the clientless VPN portal that I'm creating here. And this is important because from this point, you begin limiting your attack surface of your remote workloads by limiting that, source of authentications. I'm also using an authentication profile that includes local authentication in this example for my HVAC contractor, but there are multiple methods for authentication that you can use to authenticate remote users, such as LDAP or Radius. So this next slide here, we're looking at the client list VPN section, and you enable that client list VPN with that checkbox showing the screenshot under that tab. And then just be sure to select the security zone, which if you're following best practices, it will be a dedicated security zone for your VPN users in order to maintain that segmentation and compliance with, in this case, the contractor as they access remote workloads. The other component you'll see there is the, for the client list VPN is the DNS proxy, and you'll need that to operate, which is essentially being used to resolve application names for those client list VPN users. So here is where you're going to start specifying which applications are available on the portal for which client list VPN users. So if you notice in the screenshot, I have several configurations. In that first screenshot, the first one being for the HVAC contractor that needs RDP access to web server, as well as web access to a virtual environment where the contractor can manage the associated virtual machine. So in this case, I set up two applications with two URLs, one being the URL for Guacamole to handle RDP connections, which is essentially Apache's middleware software, and the other being the URL for VMware vSphere to connect to my virtual environment. At this point, you can consider other users, partners, or even contractors that require access to any remote workloads. If you have a specific URL or you have native HTML5 applications, for example, and decide to include them as another configuration here. This is important because now you can use this client list portal to create those positive enablement policies for those unmanaged devices. So in the bottom screenshot, you can see an example of what those positive enablement security policies look like. First rule would be allowing that web browsing application access to the client list VPN portal. And then the second rule, allowing the web browsing application access to this Guacamole server, as well as vSphere for our HVAC contractor. And then notice here that the contractor is part of the client list VPN zone, and it's not on the internal network, nor does the contractor have access to other areas of the internal network other than what's specified here. So once the portal's configured, you'll see a login page where you can authenticate with a client list user account. And as a best practice, remember to use a server certificate for from a well-known third-party CA for that portal to avoid any certificate errors. So from any, virtually any device, any operating system or browser, you can access this client list VPN portal. And in this example, we are limiting the authentication, if you remember from that configuration, from a browser only. So no agents can connect to this, but making it, completely clientless. So here's where you'll see or what you'll see really as a clientless user logging into the portal. So after authenticating, you'll be presented with the applications that are available based on the application configurations that we set up in that previous slide. So the nice thing about this portal login and the landing page is that it essentially becomes a source for user ID. So you can start creating those granular policies and that positive enforcement we talked about for these applications. If you remember from this example scenario, a restricted access for the HVAC contractor, and they only have access to that Guacamole server for RDP, and then that have it set up for that VMware vSphere applications as well. Now the reason I'm allowing access to both these applications is to illustrate the capabilities of the client list VPN solution. So if you think about virtual desktop infrastructure or VDI, or a virtual machine environment such as Citrix or VMware Horizon or even vCenter, they all support access natively through HTML5. So you can RDP, VNC, or even SSH these machines through that through client list VPN without requiring any additional third-party middleware. But if you do not have a native HTML5 environment with vSphere, for example, you could use open source middleware such as Guacamole, which I'm showing you as an example to handle that RDP over HTTP for your specific use cases. And notice that VDI environments such as Citrix Workspace or VMware Horizon. Those could be leveraged here for secure access from clientless users. So users can also add their own application URLs. So if you look at that, there's a link there at the top for the application URL. And they can add that to the landing page, portal landing page, should you choose to allow access to maybe additional remote workloads. And there are really so many possibilities as you think of any system with HTML5, management interfaces that you would require someone to remotely manage that workload, in a secure fashion. So another example would be having like your firewall management interface is one of these applications on here. You want to allow, someone to secure remote access into it to be able to manage, that application. So, for the, HVAC contractor, here's a quick screenshot of what you would see if you, maybe did not have a native HTML5 application to handle that remote access to maybe an IIS server and wanted to use a, free middleware such as, Apache, Guacamole here. And there's some other examples or third-party middleware you can use. We're using this one as an example. The benefit of the clientless setup is, just that complete visibility. And because the URLs are rewritten, you essentially take advantage of SSL encryption in that process. So now you have a secure clientless connection for the HVAC contractor with, complete visibility and that security enforcement. Now I bring up the HVAC contractor as an example because, Target, if you remember, had a breach a few years ago where they gave an HVAC company external network access. But that access wasn't segmented from the target's payment system network. So in our example scenario, we're following, Palo Alto Networks best practices with a separate security zone for those clientless VPN users and positive enablement with our security policies. So not only are we maintaining that compliance there, but we're, addressing one of the challenges, of securing remote workloads with GlobalProtect clientless VPN along with those, industry best practices. So with that, I will hand it off for the next section.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to talk about solving some of the same problems using a service that we offer that it's called Prisma Access. And what Prisma Access is a secure access server, secure access service edge, or SASE. This is a term that Gartner's come up with in the last year to describe services that combine network and security services into a single platform. And so what Prisma Access does is it provides cloud-delivered connectivity to not only your resources that are on-prem, but also virtual data center, public cloud type applications, SaaS applications, and security for internet traffic. Does this all through a cloud delivered service that you connect to with either a agent, the GlobalProtect client that makes an IPsec tunnel or an SSL tunnel, or you can actually connect branches, remote offices as well with IPsec tunnels. So this provides all of the same security that we give you on our firewall platform, the next generation firewall, the same services, SSL decryption, threat prevention, antivirus, but it's all delivered in the cloud so that you can get a day one global footprint. You don't have to deploy a bunch of firewalls. You don't have to deploy a bunch of devices. You don't actually have to deploy anything to start using this. Matter of fact, spinning up a POC for this requires nothing more than installing a plugin in Panorama and installing an agent on the machines that are going to connect to it. The components of this are made up of Prisma Access and Prisma SaaS. Prisma Access provides the inline enforcement, inline inspection, and security component for all of the internet traffic. And Prisma SaaS provides the API-based security where we model the types of data that are being stored and being accessed in SaaS environments and ensuring that the way that they're being stored and shared comply with your corporate policies and with maybe regional governance and compliance. I'm going to talk about the, on the Prisma Access side, the reasons that we decided to offer this as a service instead of just sticking with, selling hardware firewalls all the time. The primary thing is for resiliency and scaling. We have customers that have upwards of 200,000 users connecting to their Prisma Access tenant. And we are capable of automatically scaling from 2 users to 200,000 just by adding more compute resources in the cloud. The biggest benefit of a cloud delivered model like this is we can expand and auto scale dynamically, virtually to an unlimited amount. It also gives you a much simpler build out process. We don't require hardware, don't require a bunch of specialized hardware. You don't have to have support contracts that cover firewalls at each site. You don't have to roll trucks to onboard remote networks. Users are easily onboarded through the GlobalProtect client that you might already be using. And one of the really cool things is that because this is done as a service, you get the same certifications and privacy compliance levels of the hosted service. So things like FedRAMP compliance that we're in process of right now, you'll be able to inherit that compliance for your remote access and internet filtering service. So one of the biggest problems that we've seen over the last 90 days as companies have started moving, well, not started, companies overnight moved all of their workers and all their employees and all of their students off site, is a network capacity challenge. And so in a traditional model, you've got some users that are remote, and you've got branch offices, headquarters, campuses. They're all connected to your data centers, and your data centers have internet connectivity, and that may be where you're doing your internet filtering, or perhaps you have firewalls at your branches. But regardless, you're essentially paying for 2 types of capacity. You've got the firewall and security stack, where you're running all of your inspection, and then the internet connectivity for your data center. As more and more mobile users start connecting, say we move all of our users out of our offices and send them home and tell them to work from home, this internet connectivity starts to get choked out. And so there's a couple of things that we do. We reduce the amount of traffic coming from our branch offices. We might cut back on that, either intentionally or just, there's nobody there. But if we want to maintain the same level of security for our mobile users, so they're always connected to a security stack, whether they're going to the internet or SaaS products or public cloud, we have to backhaul all of that traffic through our data center. So this internet pipe needs to be upgraded. The gateways, whether they be VPN concentrators or firewalls or both, need to be upgraded at the data center, because instead of 300 mobile users, perhaps you have 3,000. I have a customer that I work with on a regular basis that went from having, on average 2,000 to 3,000 mobile users, and now they have 40,000. It's a dramatic change overnight, and without the ability to auto scale, there's a lot that has to be done at the data center here. So we wanted to completely change the way that we look at that, and we wanted to move the security in between the users and their data. So aside from COVID, the other thing that's been happening a lot lately is that our data doesn't all live in our data centers. That's what, a large part of what we're talking about today is that we have moved, are moving, or are looking at moving a lot of our data to infrastructure as a service providers, where we're building applications like David was talking about earlier, or moving applications there, or putting a lot of our data in SaaS applications, which means our users aren't accessing all of the data in the data center anymore. So backhauling all of their traffic to that data center doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. So we want to put the security stack in between the users and the data in the natural path. So we've still got a data center. We've still got some stuff there, but we've built out this Prisma Access security cloud. What we do for every customer, we build out a complete tenant that's isolated from all of the other tenants that we have. You get your own IP addresses, you get your own URLs, you get your own host names, all dedicated to you. And this is in over 100 locations globally. running on a multi-cloud environment. It's AWS and GCP today. And so if I'm a mobile user and I'm accessing SaaS traffic, or I'm accessing traffic in the data center, or infrastructure as a service stuff in Azure, GCP, or I'm just browsing the web, all of that traffic is secured and filtered inside Prisma Access. And the only traffic that has to go back to my data center is the traffic from my users that's accessing the data that still lives there. I'm not backhauling all of their internet traffic to do the inspection. I'm not backhauling all of their internet traffic so I can whitelist my IPs at the SaaS, because Prisma Access gives you dedicated IPs that you can whitelist at your SaaS providers. So we can do all of the SSL decryption, all the security inspection, everything right here in this cloud. We can actually do the same thing for your branch offices. We can connect them to the same 100+ locations via an IPsec tunnel. Any device you can put here that can create an IPsec tunnel, whether it be an SD-WAN device, a legacy router, or a firewall that you don't want to put subscriptions on anymore, whatever it happens to be, you just build an IPsec tunnel to Prisma Access, and all of your security can now be delivered in the cloud in the natural path between the users and their data. The second component of a SASE is the ability to actually secure the data once it's in your SaaS environments. Salesforce, Office 365, Box, G Suite, so all of these environments offer API-based access to them for services like Prisma SaaS. And so what Prisma SaaS does is, when you onboard your SaaS environments, Prisma SaaS will then start scanning all of the data that is stored in these SaaS environments. So if it's something like Box or GitHub, we'll scan all of the files there. Office 365, G Suite, we'll look at the email, we'll look at all the Google Docs or all the Microsoft documents that are being stored in OneDrive, Google Sheets, Google Drive, and do a whole bunch of security scanning and analysis. The same wildfire analysis that's done looking for malware, whether it be macro-based or executables. We do all that through Prisma SaaS. Something that a lot of people don't consider when they start moving to SaaS for file sharing is that SaaS is quickly becoming one of the most preeminent ways for malware to transfer from users, from one user to another. Now that people have moved most of their file sharing to SaaS products like Box and OneDrive and G Drive, it becomes a very common place to distribute and store and spread malware. So wildfire scanning, very important there. We also have a machine learning cloud-based DLP engine that's looking at all of the data that's being stored, determining what type of data it is, and analyzing the activity. So you can prevent accidental oversharing. You can prevent intentionally sharing data that you don't want to have. And we can do all of this in conjunction with the Prisma Access component as well, providing an inline filtering and an inline prevention of non-sanctioned SaaS applications, and then the API-based component to control and ensure the governance for your sanctioned SaaS applications. And so now I'm going to turn this over to Gabe, and he's going to talk about PrismaCloud.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about PrismaCloud, which is an attempt to help you control what you're doing in the cloud, how you're using the cloud, and what you're running on the cloud. That's really what it comes down to. It's just two things. PrismaCloud addresses what we're seeing as a tectonic shift right now as we go to the cloud, and it's similar to when we first started to work with bare metal servers and would keep it under the desk. We had it connected to the internet. This gave us the opportunity to run our own mail server and web servers, but we needed to mature eventually and protect it a little bit. So we moved it to a colo or someplace with a door. We restricted access to the actual interface to it and secured it with a firewall in front of it, making sure that people can't get in this way or get in this way. So sort of a network border and then an actual physical perimeter. The first tectonic shift that we had after this was switching over to virtual servers. And our temptation and our first steps, baby steps, were to simply treat it as a large place to run a whole bunch of servers, just like we did with the bare metal. And eventually what we realized was our firewall is sitting right here, and there's just a massive trunk line going into all these servers with 100 VLANs. So we had to mature again there. We brought the firewall inside so that it was aware of the virtualization. We segmented things, and we added access control onto the administrative interface so that nobody could just start something wherever they want. And so that we could limit the interactions of tenants, make sure that everybody gets the resources that they are paying for. The next tectonic shift is we're going to the cloud. And our initial baby steps were to simply lift and shift our compute into the cloud. Maybe switching to the reference architecture with VM series and transit, and then still segmenting things out so that we're protected here from network attacks. Containers, similar. We might throw something in front of the hosts. We might be clever enough to have a CN series out here, but pretty much looking at things the same way that we did it. But the cloud also has its own idea of identity and access management. It has services such as SQL and file storage, and we're even starting to get into things like serverless computing. So we're going to have to up our game again because, ironically enough, Palo Alto got so good at firewalls that attackers are now having to switch to plan B, which is to compromise credentials or find misconfigured resources or get into the control of compute and container provisioning, drop containers into the environment or servers into it and move laterally. So what we're having to do is, again, mature our operations and protect the correct configuration of all of these resources in the cloud that don't even run on a server. Protect the configuration of access and identity management. And then protect these from themselves. Protect the actual workloads that are going on these systems. So PrismaCloud brings together a whole bunch of capabilities. We went out and acquired several different companies that were their own point solutions, integrated them all into one so that we could offer you just a ton of capabilities to make sure your cloud is safe. What do I have out there? Am I compliant with popular security standards? What data is out there? Do I have vulnerabilities in my compute instances? If something happens, how do I respond to it? Am I generally secure? We're also watching the network. Cloud technology brings with it some different ways of cutting up your network, and you see different flows, and you can see them through the firewall. We'd like to also allow you to see them through the standpoint of the network flow logs coming in from your cloud provider. So we can spot anomalies. We've certainly got that game down. We've been making firewalls forever. And we can also start to help you adopt things like microsegmentation. So the lateral movement becomes much more difficult. We've been securing the north-south traffic for you for a long time. We've got reference architectures to help you secure the east-west traffic within your environment. We've got that. But we also can go a step beyond, and by being right on those workloads, microsegment them. And we use some machine learning to do that. We characterize the behavior of applications and then protect them from anomalies by either alerting or preventing. And in the case of things like containers, completely shutting down a container if you want. This is the big one, is keeping track of your identity systems. And that means analyzing IAM use, its configuration, and spotting anomalies such as a user showing up logging in from a location we've never seen them before, or using an API that we've never seen them do before. And we are keeping track of all those anomalies, alerting, blocking, and in some cases, automatically remediating. Securing what's running is great, but as we went to acquire the companies to protect the whole cloud, we also realized that you need to protect it before you even get there. And we are embracing DevSecOps to a great extent, so that going beyond just DevOps, where the developers are part of the operations, we also want them to be part of the security. So PrismaCloud brings you some tools so that at even the level of in VS Code or IntelliJ, for instance, I want to scan infrastructure as code as soon as I click save. I want to build Docker containers as soon as I save the Docker file and scan them for vulnerabilities. Maybe a little closer to deploy and run, when I check in code to my GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket, whatever you're using, maybe I want to go and scan the results of that. Integrate with something like Jenkins or Circle CI or Hashi's tools, so that when I build something and before I allow it to be deployed, I've scanned it. So we're trying to shift left, is what we call it, to involve security in the building of applications, their deployment, and then also keep them safe as we run. So watch for anomalies, watch for things that are not compliant, and integrate them with, for instance, Jira or PagerDuty, ServiceNow. We can even fire off webhooks to pass along information to any internal tool you might have created. As long as it can listen on an HTTP port, we can take care of it. And I'm going to now switch and show you a demo. Right in the browser. And here's how it goes. PrismaCloud, when you first start it up, you give it credentials to your cloud accounts. We only need enough access to do read operations on the public APIs that describe your configuration or that offer up your network flow logs. We can, however, go a little further, and if you're really into the robot army helping you out, we can protect as well. We can automatically remediate some of the compliance issues that we see. We simply give you a CloudFormation template or a Terraform template that sets up the permissions so that we can read your configuration. And we do that across multiple clouds. The first thing we do once we are integrated with your APIs is we start to inventory your environment and show you everything that's out there. Sometimes you'll be surprised because you've been only watching certain parts of your service or only certain regions, and suddenly you've got some stuff in Ireland and we have spotted it and can show you what's out there. We're also tracking your security posture of your cloud configuration. This dashboard gets you an overview so that you can start to get down to work. Maybe you come in on Monday and this is your first stop. We have policy violations in your cloud configuration. We are watching your network flows. We are counting the resources in case you see a spike there. And we're also characterizing the traffic that's coming into your environment. This has been a very busy week for suspicious traffic. I can zoom in and just take a look at an overview here. We're keeping a database of all of your configurations and we can query it. For instance, I can look at my cloud configuration. Maybe I'll just go with AWS to start and inspect things where I've pulled in configurations over the IAM interface and its password policies. Those policies are all just JSON objects. So let me query them and look for policies where the minimum password length is less than 8. And we found one. I can click through. I can see that when we first spotted it in February, it looked like this. And indeed, that's too short. It's against our policy, so I alerted. It changed in August. Here's the colored diff, but it did not change the minimum password length, so we're still alerting. We can also inspect your network traffic. This comes from the network flows, and I want to see traffic where I did accept some bytes, and the source was, and I'll use an array here. And I think I'll look at internet IPs, but I think I'll also look at suspicious IPs. Palo Alto, of course, has its own threat feeds, and we use that information to characterize suspicious IPs. We also pull in some open source threat feeds as well. And you can see that indeed, a bunch of traffic was coming in. This database server was taking SSH and a bunch of other stuff. Take a look at the traffic over time. And I can look at this database resource itself. Here are the details about it. And if I pull up the network summary, firewall configurations here, I can see that indeed everyone is allowed to hit it. Finally, we're following all the events. And so I can take a look, for instance, at events where, let's just go with a broad one of the cloud service is IAM. Take a look at events here, and I'll go with a broad stroke of 7 days. And it shows me everything that's going on. This user is deleting and creating users, but apparently we've seen that before and we're okay with that. However, Justin here did some things like creating access keys and adding some tags, and we think that is an anomaly because they've never done it from whatever location they're in. If you have very useful investigations, you'll save them. But we also ship with hundreds, almost 600 built-in investigations for things that over time we have discovered are important. For instance, IAM roles that have permissions on buckets that they have no business with. Exposing networked instances. And if a saved query is useful enough, you can turn it into a policy. Now we ship with almost 600 policies. You can add your own. And they all map to compliance standards if appropriate. So here I can show you, we have mapped all the policies into standards when it's appropriate, including MITRE ATT&CK, which itself is not a standard, but it is useful when you're investigating to be able to see which policies correspond with which parts of the kill chain. We can auto-remediate some items. For instance, we're not monitoring a web application firewall, or network security groups are completely open. We don't have threat detection emailing from a SQL database. And here's the compliance view of all the policies and how they've mapped. We can now show you your compliance with, at present, 19 compliance standards with a pass or a fail ratio. I can zoom in on one of these and see that we've mapped the overall sections, the subsections, and provided a pass and a fail. you can create reports, email them to a list of people. I can do it one time or recurring if I like. And it creates a nice PDF report for me. This can also be narrowed down if there are only certain cloud accounts I care about. We also allow you to limit which users to this interface can see which cloud accounts. So you can divide up the responsibility that way. And I can download my report right out of the web browser if I like. It's also been emailed to me. And it looks like this, very professional. And here's my overall status, resources passing and failing. And here's some more detail about it. And it gives me a description and a recommendation for how to remediate this. Policies also turn into alerts if you like. You can switch policies on and off at will, make your own, and we will alert you. The overview shows all the alerts, whether or not you've integrated with emailing them or sending them to Splunk. We have a number of integrations built in. Send them onto a queue, Security Hub, Cortex XSOAR, that is our own product, and a few other things. There's the catch-all of webhooks. So your cloud configuration needs to be secure. That's the how are you using the cloud. But what you're running on it is also a concern that you need to take into account. We are tracking all of the containers, hosts, and serverless functions that you're running, and we are continuously scanning them for vulnerabilities. This happens to be a container view right here. Machine learning has discovered which ports are normally talked over. And you can choose to automatically set up a container-to-container firewall right here. And this is complemented by our CN series firewalls as well. And that is the firewall section here. And I can just switch those on. I can create my own policies for what hosts or containers are allowed to do. We already know about some threats, so we can just switch that on. You can allow or block processes. You can allow or block IPs. You can even intercept DNS lookups. And you can also specify whether a file system access is allowed. Here I'm allowed to alert, block, or even kill off the container. But as you adopt the cloud, you're going to find that a whole bunch of stuff is going in there, and you don't quite know what's out there yet. So we are learning so that we can automatically show you this stuff. And for instance, this container, we spotted it 44 days ago. We've identified it by its SHA-256. And it was the first time we saw this one. We learned, most likely from a Docker file, that it's going to run these processes, but then we also saw it run BusyBox. So we learned that. Network-wise, there's apparently not an expose line in the Docker file, and we just learned that Java is listening on port 80. File system access, here from the infrastructure as code. Yes, everyone can read and write to temp. We can even get down to what we call capabilities, which is that a certain process should be allowed to do things like spawn a shell or edit the sudoers file, and that nothing else is allowed. Again, alert, block the activity, or completely kill off the container. We're also scanning all of your images, hosts, and functions for vulnerabilities. These are containers that have already started up, but you can also just point it at your container registry and just say, if anything new shows up here, scan it so that I know even before it's running that it has been pushed up. And we have integration with your CICD systems so that as a developer pushes up code, you are going to build it for automatic tests, and you can just add us into that and say, hey, PrismaCloud, can you take a look at this Docker image and tell me whether it's acceptable or not? And it is up to you to create policies that say, if it has any vulnerabilities, I want to run it or not allow it to run in production, but I can do it in dev, and decide how you want to deal with those things. Let me also show you serverless functions. So we are actually getting down into your serverless functions. We can see that there's a problem here. We're also doing runtime defense on these. So if there's something anomalous happens, we're going to take care of it. We're going to keep it from getting out and moving laterally. Finally, we've got compliance. And I can see my compliance of my containers, images, hosts, and functions. We have the capability to say that we trust certain images and not others. So you can just have an allow list that only allows the containers that you expect to see out there. And a nice overview here of everything that's going on. Gives you a burn down list. And that's the dime tour of PrismaCloud. We've got cloud configuration compliance, and we're also defending what you're running on your systems. And with that, I'll hand it back.
Perfect, Gabe. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and open it up now for any questions. We've had a few come in through the Q&A, and we've addressed those so far, but you do have a few experts here, right, all around across our Prisma suite of products, as well as on the firewall side. So we're happy to answer any questions that you got. One of the things I wanted to kind of just circle back on, right, is, you know, I started out early on as a network analyst and moved my way up through engineering and network management and, you know, director over a whole networking and security infrastructure. And when I look at where I started managing PIX firewalls to where we are now in regards to securing our workloads, a lot has changed. And honestly, I haven't been in the industry nearly as long as some of my counterparts have. So I think one of the things that we should definitely take into consideration here is, you know, there is going to be change. And as there is change, Palo Alto Networks is here to help you make sure that security is consistent across those. As you can see, securing containers and serverless functions and even other cloud native applications, it's not the same security that you may have been used to in the networks of past. So we're definitely here to help. We're here to make the process as hopefully as simple as possible too. I have a few customers that have, you know, come to me and said, well, now we're moving workloads to the cloud. How do I make sure that these, you know, CIS or NIST security compliance standards are actually applied across there? We have a tool for that. And one of the things that you may have noticed in both Gabe and Darren's demo is the fact that we do it across multiple offerings, right? So well over 20 SaaS applications, as well as all the major clouds in regards to the PrismaCloud side of the house. So being able to have one tool to view across all those clouds instead of all those SaaS applications, instead of trying to make and cobble together what the cloud native solutions offer, is definitely helpful to have that single view. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and open up for questions. We got about 4 minutes left. I want to be mindful of everybody's time too, so we'll go ahead and hang out for 4 minutes. And I'll also open it up for any closing thoughts from the team that presented today. So Derek, Darren, or Gabe, anything else that you'd like to share?
Sure, I'll weigh in. Certainly, I would echo that this is definitely a partnership to help you secure everything, that we're evolving into cloud technologies and you're also having to adapt to it, and that we're providing tools here that hopefully can help you.
Yeah, I guess one of the other things I'd say too, it happens all too often. I go and I'll chat with a security team or a networking team, And I'll bring up the question, well, you have a development team. What are you doing around security for the development team? And, they're almost like wild, wild west folks over there doing what they need to do. And then you worry about, the security at runtime. So I would challenge you, right? Go and chat with those DevOps folks and see, what does security look like as you shift left, as you get more towards the build or the deploy, the deploy or the build stage, as you're moving left, and see if you can, have a little bit more of a common ground earlier on instead of waiting for it to get into runtime. So there is a question here. This one will be for you, Darren. Is there any cost benefit analysis available comparing Prisma Access to current GlobalProtect licensing model?
The cost benefit is really, it's going to depend on the environment. So there are some customers with certain environments where the cost benefit, where it leans toward Prisma Access, some it leans toward.
Oh, I think we lost you, Darren. Anybody else lose him?
Yeah, me too.
All right. Yeah. All right, Darren, we lost you. I don't know if you hear us, but maybe your microphone got disconnected. I think along the lines where he's going, it really depends, right? If you have 200 users in your environment and you have the hardware firewall to support it, it definitely makes sense to put that workload on the hardware firewall. And there's a few other concerns too. It's not just the hardware firewall. Of course, the firewall can handle terminating those VPN connections, but what about your ISP link, and what's the expected user experience that you're going to have? So that's always something to take into consideration. The nice thing is, from the Prisma Access standpoint, since we can spin up those resources virtually infinitely, your user experience then becomes much more common across, no matter if you have 200 or 200,000 folks connected. As you start growing, yes, then Prisma Access definitely becomes a little bit more beneficial in regards to making sure that, again, your end users have a standardized set of access that is very much, from a resource standpoint, going to be, give them a look and feel that feels like as if they're the only person connected to the firewall. And then at the same point, being able to turn on additional features because you do have that infinite resource up there, right? So I know one of the questions that was asked inside of the Q&A was, what about, like, can I control SSL decryption and things on that line? Absolutely. You have the full control of SSL decryption within Prisma Access, as you do many of the other policies that you would set up, right? Authentication, just basic security policy, things on that line. The advantage you have in Prisma Access is if you decide to turn it on, you're not getting penalized from a resource standpoint in regards to turning on SSL decryption. So a lot of benefits there as well. Darren, anything to add? Did you get your mic fixed by chance?
Are you guys able to hear me now?
Yep, can hear you now.
Perfect timing, David. You covered pretty much everything. Yeah, it really comes down to what the use case is and what kind of value you place on the user experience and operational expenses. Those are the two areas where Prisma Access really shines. So
perfect. Thanks, sir. I've learned well from you, so it was just repeat what Darren would say. All right, well, we're right at the top of the hour, actually a little bit over now, so I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Thank you, everybody that has joined. Please feel free to ping me if you have any questions. This is David Cumbow, by the way. You will get an email from me with a copy of the slides as well as the webinar recording once it's posted to the live community. So keep an eye out for that. So thank you again so much for joining, and have a great rest of your Thursday. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, David and others, for a great presentation that will help a lot of people. As always, we welcome all questions and comments below. If you enjoyed watching this video, please give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe to be notified of all of our new videos coming from the live community. Thanks again, and have a great day.